everyone knows I'm interested in scammers. What's lesser known is I'm interested in frauds of all kind. I'm fascinated by the way that our own trusting natures can be used against us by the worst of us. Today we're talking about one such man, Sheldon Johnson, an ex-convict who goes on the Joe Rogan Experience to fool everyone into thinking that he's a changed man. He got out, he's completely reformed, and people bought this hook, line, and sinker only for a month later him to get arrested for murdering somebody and trying to get away with it by dressing in a blonde wig. Now, this story is absolutely wild. But before we get into it, let me say, I actually think people's trusting natures, people's desire for redemption and redemption arcs in people to see people change is a good thing. I also think it's necessary for us to have a bit of skepticism when we're introduced to these great stories of redemption. Now, this whole thing starts, as I said, on the Joe Rogan Experience. A guy named Josh Dubin, a civil rights attorney, brings this guy on to talk about his experience. And one thing I found interesting is normally it sounds like Josh brings on people on the Joe Rogan Experience. Everyone knows sometimes there's like wrongfully convicted people. I think that's a great cause to raise awareness for that people sometimes are wrongly convicted. But right away, there's a bit of a different tone to this episode because they go, well, like, he's not wrongly convicted. He's actually rightfully convicted, which for me raised some red flags.
Typically, the person sitting to my right is someone that was wrongfully convicted. So I don't want to bury the headline. Sheldon is guilty.
Now, if you're asking yourself, well, why are you bringing a guy who is rightfully convicted on this show to, talk about how unfair it is? Pretty soon it gets brought up that the real problem with Sheldon Johnson's conviction was the sentencing. He was sentenced to 50 years by the judge who, in Sheldon Johnson's own words, basically treated him like he was nothing.
And he just called me a menace to society, and he gave me 50 years.
Now, the guy who brings him on, Josh Dubin, calls this a travesty. He says, this was just a second offense. And the people in question, the people this guy robbed, spoiler alert, Sheldon Johnson robbed these guys, they only got 2 stitches. And that's kind of brought up as like the unbelievable fact is that Sheldon Johnson got 50 years for 2 stitches. Like, what are we doing here? It's this, travesty of the criminal justice system.
I know I've said this before, and it probably sounds repetitive, but another miracle sitting to my right, just like a marvelous human being who was basically told by a judge, by an African-American judge, that you don't matter, you don't count, and I'm going to throw your life away for a crime in which the victim received 2 stitches. And on a second offense, his first offense being a gun possession charge. So I will say this, that he received a sentence that far eclipses a sentence that would be commonly doled out for murder or manslaughter.
So now that you understand sort of why he was on Joe Rogan to talk about how unfair this was, I want to say that, I'm not going to get into the legality of, whether that's a good sentence, bad sentence. What I will say is that watching the full episode back, I realized it wasn't quite as simple as Josh was making it sound. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, like, oh, he put me away for, 2 stitches. That's not really what happened. I mean, essentially, there was a gun possession charge, but then the exact details of these robberies are kind of wild. Like, it's pretty clear that although it ended up with 2 stitches, it could have gone a lot worse. Basically, it sounds like they held a gun to this guy's head and robbed him, and then did the same thing to another guy. And even just hearing Sheldon Johnson, it doesn't sound like it was a non-threatening situation. It sounds like someone definitely could have gotten killed, which, spoiler alert, is what happens after he gets out of jail.
As far as I was concerned, his jury was even. So I robbed him, and I took his jury. And his girlfriend happened to be there, and unfortunately, she got caught up in the situation. I had a bunch of young guys with me, and they robbed her as well. And he got hit in the head with the gun right here on the side of his head, and he got 2 stitches.
So yeah, this wasn't like getting punched. It was you pistol whipped a guy with a gang of other guys robbing this guy and his girlfriend. They do this again, and then he finally gets caught for it. And the judge says, okay, you seem like a menace to society. He throws the book at him, which, I'm not really going to defend that. I mean, I think we do have criminal justice problems. But in hindsight, the judge was right. I mean, say what you want about anything else. Turns out the judge was right, because after getting out, after fooling the entire Joe Rogan audience into thinking, this poor guy, he's completely changed. He's turned his life around, etc. Sheldon Johnson goes right back to his old ways, unfortunately. So here's the details of the story. Warning, it's pretty gruesome. Basically, cops found a dismembered body in a Bronx apartment where Sheldon Johnson, basically, it sounds like, went to an old enemy's place, held him up at gunpoint, and then killed him. Neighbors told cops the victim was heard desperately pleading with his killer shortly before 2 shots rang out in the apartment near Ogden Avenue. "Please don't," the doomed man was heard saying. "I have a family." Sheldon Johnson did not care about that, and he was caught on security surveillance footage walking out of the apartment in and out, and eventually trying to get materials to clean up the mess, clean up the crime scene. He brought a blue bin and eventually is seen trying to leave with a blonde wig, which... honestly, that ain't helping you, brother. We know what you're... That's such a hilarious screenshot. That was not working. That's Clark Kent putting on the glasses and thinking, nobody's going to see through it. We've also gotten footage released of him leaving the apartment with cleaning supplies, which I found pretty interesting. And essentially, a pretty observant neighbor, they heard the gunshots and, thank goodness, reported it. Sounds like the cops were called and ultimately he was arrested. But going back to the con artistry part of this whole story, because again, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how we can be fooled as a public by these people who are always telling us, that's the old me, this is the new me. And again, I think that's a beautiful part of human nature to believe that. But it is also interesting to look at the red flags we could have seen coming. So I want to point out 2 things. One, I was looking at it, and it doesn't seem to me like this was some big crime of passion. It seems like it was a premeditated thing, because the victim is identified as Colin Small, who may have had a beef with Johnson while they were both doing time at Sing Sing prison. So it sounds like Johnson got out, and he has this beef with a guy. Gets invited on the Joe Rogan Experience. And here's my thing. He must have known that he had the problem with this guy. Decides to go on Joe Rogan and say, hey, I'm changed. I'm a changed man. I learned to manage my anger. all this stuff. All the while, you know what I mean? It's not like he gets into an altercation after the fact, and not knowing that was somehow in his life, right? That's what I found so strange about this. So he went on the show knowing that he's still got problems with people, knowing that, I don't know. I found this so strange. I'm like, the part that interests me, I'm thinking, did he know while he was on the show what was going to happen eventually? Right? Did he just think he was going to get away with it? I guess is my point. Because to me, this all seems very premeditated, right? And this is also why I was kind of shocked that Josh Dubin brought him on. Because again, like I said, normally he's bringing on people who were wrongly convicted. And you have to wonder, he was sitting next to this guy as he describes, what happened. And his own description is not good. He talks about his time in jail and how he wasn't just some ordinary guy. He was the top of the gang. And he says this himself.
There's so much bullshit because I was in a gang and I was top of the food chain. I had my own nation. I wasn't just like the random gang member. I had a whole nation under me.
This is what I think is wild. I mean, when that judge who sentenced him looked at his case, I wonder if he kind of saw that. It's like, look, by this guy's own admission, I'm not just a regular guy. I'm not just an ordinary low-level guy. He says, I was top of the food chain. I was robbing people with groups of guys around me, pistol whipping some of them, and taking their money. And so when the judge calls him a menace to society, it's kind of hard to like be mad at the judge. I mean, this whole experience is supposed to get us mad at the judge, but in hindsight, it's like, bro called it. Now, I do want to say before we wrap this story up that I actually am very supportive of the Innocence Project, which Josh Dubin is a part of. Wrongful convictions do happen. And yes, even when somebody is rightfully convicted, sometimes the sentence doesn't fit the crime. Sometimes people can change. But sometimes they don't change at all. Sometimes they tell you exactly who they are on a podcast, and, you know, you have to believe them. Funny enough, although people are coming into the comment section now saying, you know, how it aged, you know, in hindsight, the judge was right, blah, blah, blah. I thought this guy had it right 1 month ago before anything happened. This guy says he's listening to Sheldon Johnson describe his history, and he says this guy should still be in prison. And unfortunately, he's right. And now someone's dead because he was let out. It's a really chilling story, reminding us of human nature, reminding us we can all be fooled, and also reminding us that the people who fool us have terrible escape outfits. I still can't get over it. He puts on a blonde wig. My guy was caught. 4K security footage over and over. I mean, you couldn't have stood in a worse hallway. You know what I mean? Like, you get brought it, you're bringing in the cleaning supplies, the blue bin, the blonde wig. I mean, my guy, I don't know how he did not think he was going to get caught here. He thought he was just going to go on Joe Rogan, become a celebrity, and still also do this. Although I should tell you that Sheldon maintains that he's innocent. Apparently, after being booked for the brutal murder of this guy, he yelled out, "I'm innocent, I'm innocent." I think he has to explain, though, why he was bringing in a bunch of cleaning supplies and bins at 2 a.m. in the morning. I mean, maybe he was, trying to clean the guy's house, make some side cash, organize his house, and happened to be in the room while he got murdered. But I'm not really buying it. So, just a reminder that, look, it's actually good that as a society we want redemption stories. At the same time, we've got to be watchful, because hidden amongst the people who change are people who haven't changed. And yeah, this is a crazy reminder of it. Okay, anyway, I just thought it was a really interesting story, fascinating look into human psychology. I just was blown away this guy would go on Joe Rogan. Like, what was the plan? What was the plan, Sheldon? Like, you're going on to say you changed. You know you have this beef. I don't know. I think he thought he was going to get away with it. I really do. I think he thought maybe he had this blonde wig already. Maybe he thought he was going to get us with it. Not today, Sheldon. Yeah. Anyway, that's basically it. Tip.